Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome, everyone, to the Lurnist Show, broadcasting live to you today from the Phoenix Business RadioX studios here in Tempe, Arizona. I'm your host, Deborah Hildebrand.
And I'm your co-host and producer, Lauren Jenny, to celebrate Women in Agile.
There we go. So one of my passions is to help young girls who want to have a career in STEM. This show is a big part of how we get there because as we highlight women who are doing amazing things in Agile, we create role models for young women to look up to and emulate. So I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Learn Agile. We provide Agile and Scaled Agile certification courses, professional learning courses, and coaching. You can get certified as a safe Agilist, a product owner, a Scrum Master, and more. So find more at learnagile.com. That's LURN agile.com. So we're really excited today to welcome Rosalind Radcliffe, the IBM Distinguished Engineer and Chief Architect for DevOps for Enterprise Systems, and Janice Linden Reed, President of Ready Option and Senior Manager of Enterprise Agile Coaching for Salesforce. Thank you, Janice and Rosalind, for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So Janice, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in your work?
Sure thing. So I'm here in Seattle. I work for Salesforce currently, and I have actually been in Agile since about 2006. I'm best known for my work with the Kanban method, and I spent 10 years as the running operations for the Kanban University, and through that doing events and books and classes and certifications and everything for Kanban. So right now back to general Agile, but always happy to advocate for the Kanban method.
And then Rosalind, same question. Can you tell us about yourself and your background in your work?
Sure. I'm with IBM. I've been here 33 years, so I've been there a long time, my entire career. I've done all sorts of things in my career, working from the large systems through systems management, through just about everything that there is in IBM. Most recently, I'm working in DevOps to help make sure that even our largest systems, even our largest customers can do that transformation to Agile and lean thinking, moving to the full DevOps process. And so I work with lots of large customers as well as our development team to make sure we can be as efficient and as effective as possible while doing development across all the platforms.
Really cool. Thank you so much for telling us about that. So Janice, you mentioned your work with Kanban. What is Kanban and what is it used for?
So Kanban is a management method that is actually very often layered on top of an existing management method. So often people will be doing Scrum or Waterfall or whatever, and then they will add Kanban onto that. It is a method that focuses on the flow of work. So that whole process of when you start work all the way through to when you're ready to deliver it. And it's really about optimizing all of that, building a visual model of the entire system. So it focuses a lot on systems thinking and different techniques for optimizing the flow of work, such as limiting how much work you have in progress at any one time.
Okay. So how is it different from Scrum and other Agile methods?
The most common belief about Kanban as opposed to Scrum is that Kanban doesn't have iterations or sprints. In fact, that's not actually true. I've done more Kanban with iterations than without, but it is true that since, as I mentioned, that focus on flow, if you're really focused on flow, in the long run, iterations, which are these time boxes, protected time boxes for your work, those are eventually going to get in the way. I like to say that Kanban is sort of supercharged Agile because it allows almost infinite flexibility in when you can start work, when you can deliver work. It is, I would say, much less prescriptive than Scrum. Scrum is very much like, do this, here are your meetings, here are your roles, go. Kanban is more, it's really committed to starting wherever you are right now, even with all the problems you have right now, and then adding these improvements and really getting, the first thing is really getting that visual model built just as a mirror of where things are to start. Scrum doesn't do that. So I'd say that's one difference. Scrum is, in my opinion, a little more of a one size fits all, and Kanban is much more like in context wherever you are.
It's so funny because in class, a course that I'm taking, we are learning about Agile and everything. And we've got taught all the Agile methods so far, but I think Kanban is probably my favorite just because it is straightforward. You get a visual of what you're trying to represent and stuff. So I definitely will take your feedback and bring it back to the class, of course. But also, Rosalind, I want to ask you about DevOps and why is it important for business agility?
Yeah, so actually the conversation about Kanban and trying to make you optimize flow, well, what's DevOps? Let's optimize the flow. And it really is all about trying to break down those barriers. And I like to describe it as Agile and Lean brought together. And many people, I sort of recommend a Kanban approach to the transformation because you're doing a transformation, you're moving through this. But we need, in large enterprises, they have to figure out the way to move at the speed business requires today. And so you can't have some teams doing waterfall that takes 6 months. You can't have anything take 6 months or a year anymore. That just doesn't work. And some teams delivering every week or every day. It's an impedance mismatch. And so we have to do this kind of transformation to help organizations understand, optimize the flow, not just for the team, but for the organization, and optimize the flow from the very beginning of the business process all the way through. And different teams are going to choose different methodologies. I've got lots of infrastructure teams that choose Kanban because, well, they say it's because they don't like iterations, but it's more than like they just have constant work and they need to limit their work in progress. Mm-hmm. And then we have development teams who are using Scrum or variants of Scrum, different, versions of it. Some of them are actually doing Kanban while doing Scrum, but, you can do anything to try and make sure they've got those iterations and they've got the delivery cycle because they do have to deliver at some point in time. And so it's all about optimizing flow the best way you can within your organization. And in large scale enterprises, we have the problem that they're highly regulated usually, and those regulations get in the way. And so you have to figure out the right ways to deal with the regulation. And through DevOps and transformation, you can actually deal with the regulation easier because you have the transparency, you have the visibility, you have the tracking. And it means it's actually easier to do. People don't always think that way, but it is easier.
That's really interesting, Rosalind, because I get so many questions from my clients who are in high regulated environments about how can we do Agile with these huge regulations and long lead times and things like that. So we've just started doing a lot of DevOps, so I'm really excited to bring those into my clients. That's great. I love to hear that. So I always want to ask about COVID just because it's the year of COVID, right? So and maybe we'll get rid of this question in about a month or so. But I'm just wondering how COVID has impacted your work. And Janice, you can go first. Has it impacted your work and how?
I actually was working from home before COVID hit. So I would like to say that, oh no, I just have no change at all. But it's really different when the rest of the world is also working from home, and especially working with teams and doing, before I was doing a lot with conferences and, event planning and things, and all of that has been disrupted. But I think in the long run, we're going to see some really positive changes in terms of the way that distributed work happens. It's kind of been a forcing function to move that ahead very quickly.
I agree. How about you, Rosalind?
So actually, I've had a very interesting experience because I was traveling 90% of the time. So I wasn't home. We did the math comparison with my son who's in college, and I beat him last year by 10 days. Literally, I was home 10 more days than he was. It wasn't a good sign. So my life changed instantly. I'm not on airplanes. I'm not in hotels. I can't do my customer job in the same way. The other thing that changed was IBM, who has been very focused on back to work. So we've been in the office when I wasn't traveling in the office and my development teams were in the office. We went to 95% working at home instantly overnight because it was the right answer. And so it's been a very difficult in my world. How do I still do all that customer work? But it's been great. I've been able to see my family more than I've seen them in, as we like to joke, since my first son was born. So it's made a huge impact, and so it's a different world for me. But I like being home, so that's a good thing. I don't get to go and do all the customer work and all the conferences, et cetera, but I do get to be home.
So do you think that will go back to normal and once this is all over, or do you think things will change as far as like the travel and stuff like that?
I think we're going to have a new normal. I don't believe that the world is going to go back to some of the meetings that I did, get on a plane, fly across the world and have an hour meeting. Probably didn't need to fly across the world and have an hour meeting. But the workshops, the long day work, the all day workshops, the real client interaction, I think it's got to come back. And so I think there'll be a new normal. It won't be, always in the office all the time, and it won't be traveling all the time, but there will be some kind of, let's get back to reasonableness. I just don't know when. I just don't know when. And that's the part that's the hard part. We've had to come up with new ways to do all of the workshop kind of work. And it's not as efficient, but it works sort of. So it'll be good enough for a set of things. But I'm looking forward to the new normal sometime.
Yeah, I agree. I do, obviously I do a lot of classes and workshops and client work. And it is really hard to do that via, a Zoom or whatever you use. And there's tools out there, but it's just not the same as being in the same room with people. So I completely agree. So Janice, why is better management of work important to worker well-being? And what do we mean by better management of work?
Well, I mean, I know this is going to shock everyone, but there's this idea of people burning out or people getting stressed by their workload. And I know that's news to everyone, so just take it in. It's like this has been a problem, a known problem for so long. And you would think there would be a good progress in resolving the fact that and there's been studies on this about the percentage of stress that comes from work, specifically from things like trying to meet deadlines or, being in stressful situations with your team, with your manager. And it's such a major source of stress for people. Yet currently there's a trend of telling workers that they need to be, this word keeps being thrown around, resilient. You need to be resilient. And what that means is that you need to be able to, I don't know how else to put it, kind of be okay with the stress. And there is an element of truth to that. It's good to be able to manage your own stress. But I would argue that organizations also have an obligation to try to resolve this issue of, everything from unreasonable workloads, unreasonable deadlines, not giving workers enough autonomy. There's a lot of different things that contribute, and the organizations really could be proactive about this. I think there are a lot of reasons that they are not doing as much as they could do. One is they simply don't know what to do. They don't know what management changes to make. The other is that we really have not gotten away from this kind of a Taylorism, sort of thinking of that, well, if people would just work harder, or if people, ultimately sort of saying that people are not competent, that they're not motivated. And if only they would be, then they'd be okay, which is, of course, ridiculous in this day and age. So one of the things that I'm very committed to with working with Lean and Kanban is that it's really, so much of it is about having this respect for the worker, getting everyone involved at all levels, and especially about just optimizing the way that work is handled, because the result of that, it isn't that you're doing less work. In fact, many cases you're accomplishing more, but you're doing it in a more intelligent way that has better communication and better collaboration. And by focusing on that instead of, well, why aren't you working harder? Then it ends up, I think it takes us to a place of greater wellness. And it's very kind of a timely topic right now when people are under so much additional stress. Workers in particular, they are now dealing with, of course, kids at home and all these other stressors on top of everything that they normally deal with in their jobs. So I think it's more important than ever to really focus on trying to address these issues. And there are specific techniques that can be applied to help.
And where would we find those techniques? Do you have them? Do you do like a workshop or?
So I actually have quite a lengthy article that I wrote that's published on Medium that I think I provided the link, but I can check. And this was about worker wellness, and I talk about I think 4 techniques. Let's see if I can remember. But things like, for example, looking at decision authority. That simply means who has the ability to make decisions in your organization. Sometimes not all those people need to have approval on something. Sometimes you can cut out some of that and make it more direct. That's one thing. There's demand shaping, which is actually being conscientious about what type of work requests you are getting and how you want to handle them. These are all things we all just take for granted and like, oh yeah, we know how to deal with our work. But until you get very explicit about it, you can make sure that everybody has the same understanding and that you've made conscious agreements about how to handle it. So this is much of what Kanban does, is it just simply puts all that stuff out in the open and says, all right, let's actually talk about this.
That's Kanban and Lean and Agile. I love it. It's great. I love it. Applied to human resources. It's great. I love it.
Yeah. I saw, real quick, Rosalind, I saw you laughed before in the beginning of the conversation. I just want to hear kind of your thoughts on it. It seemed like you had some things to say.
It is, I appreciate everything that was just said, and I was agreeing wholeheartedly at the fact that we have to do things. And I know I spend a lot of time with clients and internally about working on this visibility of work. Because I am an executive and I live in that rank as well in IBM, but it is this discussion of you can't ask people to do more than they can humanly do, but if you don't know what they're doing, how do you know whether or not you can ask or not? And so providing the visibility of work and making it really clear what is currently on the backlog and where does this requirement fit in the priority, so that people can work appropriately. And if they're doing Scrum or if they're doing things with iterations, don't interrupt them in the middle of an iteration. Let them finish, please. Little things that just, if we all, made it easier for people, that it would be much better for the development teams. And I honestly think this COVID time, though, I know a lot of people love working at home. There is no end. The biggest problem I'm seeing among people is they don't understand how to end their day. Mm-hmm. And because the work just keeps coming, you can just work. And I've always said, whoever you work for will be happy for you to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have to say no. You have to figure out where those limits are. And if things are visible, if work is visible, if it's clear what you're doing, and if you automate all those manual tasks out of their jobs so that they're not doing the repetitive, silly stuff. I mean, nobody should have to do those manual deployments. Nobody needs to waste their time doing those things. It should all be done through automation so that we can focus on optimizing, building, doing things better. And that's why I was smiling. I appreciate it when we think about the humans of the world, or the humans of DevOps, or the humans of Agile, because we're all people, and we have to. We are the asset in this case, which is a bad way of putting it, but we are the valuable thing that generates. And we have to remember we're people and we're humans, and we have limits and we have boundaries.
Going back to leadership and stuff, Rosalind, what kind of leadership skills are required for today's environment when dealing with change?
Being willing to give up that command and control world. People have to understand that decisions should be made where they belong, and that as an executive or as somebody, you don't have to be involved in all of those decisions. You need to make the decision about the spectrum, the area they're working, the strategic focus, and let people who are actually doing the work make the right decision. This concept of being willing to accept change, to understand change, and to trust people. And those leaders that are willing to trust and are willing to accept that nothing's perfect. Something can go wrong. Certain places things can't go wrong, and I got that. But most of the time, if something goes wrong, it's not going to kill you. There are exceptions to that, but in general, our software, it's not going to kill you. When we think about it that way, okay, let's also put the right guardrails in place. Let's make it so that, people have enough testing, they have the capacity, they have the things. But in leadership today, we have to accept that change is going to happen. And change is the only normal that there is. It's going to keep changing. The industry is changing. IT is changing. The world is changing. We have to accept that as leaders and change our mindset to get out of this command and control, take your choice of old ways of working and move to this new process, and make sure we're letting people make decisions and trusting them to make the right decisions with the right guardrails around it. We're not just letting everybody go do things. And if it's not a jet engine that could crash, if something goes wrong while you're in test, you just move on. So we need to face that kind of reality too, that, it many times is not life-threatening. I have to be careful because I do know people who build things that are life-threatening, but most of the time it's not life-threatening. And so, let's just let people learn. Let's people make mistakes and learn from their mistakes.
I'd like to add to that this concept of leadership, and it's huge in terms of really limiting the possibilities of success. I used to fly around the world doing Kanban workshops, and more than once I had people say, wow, I love this. This is so great. I wish we could use it. Because they knew that in their culture, they would not be able to present it was either that they couldn't present a new method like that because leadership wouldn't tolerate it, or that they actually couldn't make things visible because they were running everything while telling leadership that they were running it a different way, because the leadership was such that they had to, because it would have, it would not have worked, and they weren't going to say that to management, but that was the reality. So we see this all the time. It's probably the biggest thing that gets in the way, which is really tragic, because you would think the management would really be the ones the most motivated for innovation and success.
Yeah, I see most of it coming from the middle layer, or the level is where change starts. It rarely starts at the leadership level. I agree.
Well, and it's also the middle layer that stops it from happening.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was going to stop myself.
Yeah, they lose control. So people like to build their fiefdoms. They like to build their organization and their organization bigger, and that control is the thing that leaders need to understand, that set strategy, give people boundaries, set the responsibility, but then let people do things. But you got to have visibility. I remember one of our organizations turned to a very visible dashboard for everything. I mean, it was completely visible. In fact, it was on the internet. So literally all the development for this product was, jazz.net. It showed on the internet so customers could see it, whatever. If something came in as a Sev 1 issue, it showed up. So when you walked into senior management, you could have done everything you could. And, somebody opened a problem the minute before you walked in the door, and now you've got a Sev 1 and you've got to explain why. Well, the first discussion was, how do we fix it so that what we show to the management team is 15 minutes delayed or 30 minutes delayed? The second discussion, which we got to, was, no, executives need to understand this is live. This is real. We're going to show you the real data, the real information. And if something just happened, something just happened. Mm-hmm. That's what happens. This is the real status. There's no faking it. There are no charts. Made life so much easier not having to put together charts for a status meetings. That's the other thing I like about things like Kanban and whatever. There's no more charts. Just get rid of those. It's live data. Use the real data. Don't fake it somehow.
But also, leaders need to understand that there's no magic wand, and that it's one thing to see that a problem exists, but you have to trust your people, or even understand their processes to know it's going to take a little bit of time to resolve this, or whatever. That it isn't like, oh, there's a problem, fix it right, and drop everything else and fix it this minute.
Well, and what's the problem? Does it matter?
Yeah, and understanding it. Yeah.
Not that we should ignore problems, but there are problems that don't actually matter. They aren't important to fix right now.
So Janice, I want to ask you this question. Why do organizations struggle so much to deliver on time?
So if you think about what causes organizations to not deliver on time, you can get a bit of insight into that, which is that, what we would sort of call risk as just a big bucket. It's anything in the, definitely anything in the flow of work that is disruptive, unexpected, and a lot of times it does get down to clarity, communication, coordination, that sort of thing. So as I've mentioned, like with Kanban, we address some of those types of problems. But the other side of this is the expectation. And when we talk about delivering on time, well, what was that deadline based on? Did we consider all the different aspects when estimating how long it would take to deliver? Did we consider, security and regulatory and all these other sorts of elements, or were we just thinking of the development? Were we thinking about an optimal scenario? I mean, if someone says, come to my house for dinner and their house is 10 miles away, are you thinking, well, okay, I'm going to hit every light is going to be green and the roads are going to be in perfect condition and my car is going to be in perfect condition. Oh, and it's a supercharged performance vehicle. And all of a sudden, but people, we hear that and we think, well, of course we would not expect that. But often the estimates are based on that kind of thinking. So it makes a lot more sense to track the data and see what our actual performance is, regardless of the reason. And then from there, we can sort of say, okay, well, now we know where we are, and let's now try to reel that in and maybe make better performance if we're not satisfied with that. The other thing is that I think leadership cares more about predictability than they do about speed. Now, that may not always be true, but I think in most cases that is the more desirable thing. And workers often don't get that. They just think, faster, faster, faster. But actually, they would rather have something that they can point to the board, to the investors, to whoever, and say, here is when this is going to be available, and it will be true.
Yeah, one of the comments with that, most of the time I see things failing or not making the schedule is because the schedule was set first.
Yeah.
I have to have this, and this is when I have to have it. Not, I need this, when can I have it? Or when they have schedules that are shipping every 6 months, it's absolutely critical that you make this regulation, but I'm not going to let you work on it until here, and it's due here. And okay, this doesn't work. There's not enough time in the day. There are not enough resources. There's not enough. And it's the urgency that comes up that I think screws every schedule I've seen. The other thing is nobody counts for process. I mean, nobody in their schedules counts for all the process overhead that ends up in the process. And so,
yeah, there's a belief that all work is equal and that it's all urgent. And that's just, it sounds ridiculous, but it's incredibly common. So one of the things, like with Kanban, one of the things that you can do is try to get into a concept of classes of service, of different, kind of what's your first class, what's your business class, what's your economy class, of your work. And then realize that you can make trade-offs. If something more urgent comes in, you can drop something else, but it doesn't mean that everything is equal.
I love that. So Rosalind, this is a huge topic nowadays, but how important is it for diversity in the technology industry?
Critical, important, impossible to live without it. So one of the things, and I talk about it, anytime anybody will give me a chance to talk about it, I'll talk about it. Diversity gives us our innovation. One of the ways you cause innovation is by having different thought processes, people with different perspectives. And if everybody looks and acts the same, they don't have different perspectives. And so you lose out on all of that opportunity for diversity. And if you look at the statistics, if you look at the numbers, and I didn't pull them up before now, but they all show that diversity actually brings innovation. It brings companies to be more successful in the stock market, everything about it. And even simple things like diversity helps you make a better product because the people who are going to use your product are a diverse set. Mm-hmm. So if we represent the population, so it's not all about one thing, or we do need more women in IT. We do need more diversity in IT, but it's not that we need one group in particular. We just need a diverse set. We need a diverse set of people. So we get all those different thought processes and all those different backgrounds and all those different perspectives to get us to think about each other. The other thing is we have to listen to those. So, not just hire them and bring them in, but actually listen when somebody has an idea, and make sure that we're bouncing our ideas off each other and listening to the other comments. Because you can come out with the best thing in the world by just having that, not argument, but argument, that discussion, that heated discussion about this is the best way, this is the best way. Well, in the end, I bet you most times you come up with a third way or whatever. The not the ideas that anyone came up with, but it's the combination of ideas that generate that much better thought. And when we don't include diversity, we leave out so much of the population. There's so many people available. When I go look at the statistics about how many open jobs there are in IT, I just cringe. We can't fill them all. Well, you can't tell me there isn't enough population out there. What's going on? I mean, what are we doing here? Why can't we get people? Are we looking for the right people? Are we looking for the diversity? And I know we have a problem in college. We aren't graduating enough. Well, why do you need a college degree?
Yeah, there's a lot of really great technical skills out there that can, like Galvanize is great. So I agree.
Or P-Tech. We have the program that's High School Plus. And so there are lots of opportunities. Let's open the spectrum. Let's open the spectrum to people coming back into the workforce. Let's open the spectrum and see what we can get. And then we have a more innovative company, and then we can do more effectively.
Yeah, I love that comment about that. Also, that we have to listen to people that are that it's not just enough to have the representation. We actually have to involve them. I've been in the last year involved in an advisory role with an event. I know that I was brought in partly because they were under pressure to have more women involved. I'm an advisor, right? So I was giving advice. At least 2 occasions, my advice was completely disregarded. And then later they did take that advice, but not when it came from me. It was from when it came from somebody else. It was basically the same thing. And so if they had taken my advice, they could have, it would have been helpful to take action earlier. But this is what I see happening, is they kind of are checking the box of oh, we have a woman, or we have whatever it is. But then that isn't the end of the story. You have to actually involve diverse ideas and listen to other voices, even if it's someone who you're maybe not used to working with, or who has ideas that are not maybe as comfortable.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. We have to listen, we have to cooperate, we have to want to participate, or we're just, checkboxes are worthless. Checkbox hiring doesn't help. Thinking about just because you're diverse, but actually bringing that idea in and having communication. I know I've been on all male teams, and I've put up with it, and I've been in diverse teams, and in general, the diverse teams have done significantly better. One, they've been better to be in. They've been more fun. Now, maybe that's just me and my viewpoint. I'm sure that some other guys liked their all-male teams, but really and truly, we got more done. We got more valuable work done because you could get that diverse thought. And that's what I think really matters in that, and just growing the community and getting people to participate and listen and hear them.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen to me, Janice, in engineering school. So I think that happens to women and minorities more often than not, and then they lose interest in whatever it is, right? Whether it's engineering or technology or whatever. When they're not heard, then they just stop doing it, right? So I think it happens a lot.
Well, and I've had also the opposite experience, where I've been a conference organizer, and I've tried to bring women in as, not just because they're women, but because they had some interesting idea or whatever. And I said, hey, I'd like you to speak on this. And majority of time they said no, because they didn't feel confident enough. Mm-hmm. And And I don't blame them. I mean, you spend your whole life having your ideas diminished. You get nervous about this. But I've certainly dealt with a lot of men where they don't have a single thing put together and they're ready to get up there and speak. And it's just it's frustrating. So I've looked into things like, well, could there be sort of a women only like support network or something like that to get women to get more comfortable in these situations.
Yeah, I think there's organizations out there for that. Yeah.
I think there are a number of organizations, but I'll say I'm the kind of person that's just going to shove them out there anyway. You can do this session. I mean, I'll be there. I'll sit there. I'll be there. So support you, but go. And we have to do that for some people. The somewhat of the problem is it's usually women who have that problem, but it's not just, it's women, minorities, whatever, but it's also some very capable men have the same self-image is what I want to call it problem. They're second guessing themselves. And we just have to give an opportunity for everyone to speak and allow them to speak. I've been in more scenarios than I care to think about where, you didn't necessarily hear the woman, what they said, the room's talking, they're not going to listen. But if you can get some, and I work with some guys who, repeat my idea, but give me credit, but getting others to repeat the idea and giving you credit, not just taking it, those kinds of things, and teaching others that are already senior leaders to follow that mold, you can help grow that diversity and getting people. That's another example of leadership, making sure you're bringing in everybody, recognizing their contributions.
So switching gears, Janice, what part of the organization causes the most trouble? And when I mean trouble, I mean like blocking the smooth delivery of work.
We referenced this a little bit earlier as far as leadership, but I'm actually not going to say leadership as much. I'm going to say upstream, that the work, wherever the work is coming in from, what happens particularly in Scrum. Scrum has such a team focus. And so what happens is work comes in. Now, ideally, you're going to have definition ready and all this kind of stuff. But, it's often will come in and it will be not well specified or the situation changes. Which may be from the same stakeholders that gave you the work. Guess who gets blamed when it doesn't get delivered? It's not that whoever provided the work request, it's the team that gets blamed for, so I really believe I've seen this again and again that, teams will be just tearing their hair out, trying to figure out how can we be more predictable? How can we resolve these problems? Turns out the issue was not in the team. So that's something that having that visibility into the entire value stream, it really helps.
Very cool. Okay, so we're at the time where we like to ask you to give some advice, free advice out there for our young women looking to get into careers in Agile. So I'm going to let Lauren take over. And go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you, Deborah. Okay, so for both of you, a question I receive all the time when being asked about Agile is what it's used for. So for all the college students out there, can you both explain how Agile is applied to any job and why it's used? Why is it so important to use it as well? Anyone?
Anyone.
You can go first.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so why Agile? I always find this easiest to explain to people who ever did waterfall, because I did for 20 years. I did waterfall project management. And roughly how that works is you have a project spec and it's very detailed document, big document. And the rule is that has to be complete before it goes to the next stage. And then that stage has to be complete before it goes to the next stage. And what we would do, we would be doing development, and we would say, I have to change something. Don't tell, because you're not allowed to change it. You're supposed to be following the spec, but the world changes, situations change, the market changes, the customers change, the organization changes. Of course it does. And so that means that the way you're working, what you're doing, you need the ability to pivot in terms of what you're developing or the service you're providing. Agile is great because it gives you those pivot points and that flexibility and that communication, and it's not as heavily about just the specifying. So that's kind of the simplest way. It's kind of in the name, right? It's Agile. It's more flexible. There are formal Agile systems, of course, but you could actually, in any context, you could apply an Agile mindset. So even if your organization or your department is not working in Agile officially, you could still try to, for any work that comes in, try to have an understanding, a basic understanding of it up front, and have frequent check-ins, even daily check-ins, to make sure you're still on track, and try as much as possible to keep from being interrupted during that time. I know that is hard. And then when you deliver, take the time to actually look back at your processes. Doing all of those things, even if you're not officially Agile, would give you a lot of the benefits of an Agile practice.
Yeah, when I think about Agile, I many times work with clients, say, I'm not talking big A Agile, I'm talking little a Agile, just to get them out of the mindset of the Agile official process, because that scares them to death. I work with many clients who are, legacy waterfall. That's the only thing they've ever known. That's the way they've always worked. And it's just too scary when you think about Agile. And so we focus on the agility. We focus on the visibility, the transparency, making sure we understand, making sure we have fast feedback, and getting that feedback and pivot, making sure we're learning from each iteration, trying to break down the work into smaller things. And there are some things it's hard to do that with. I'm going to pick on firmware. It's a little harder in firmware to be as agile, though they can do a lot with learning and experimenting. But when you build a chip, you kind of build a chip. Yeah. So there's a little difference. But hardware aside, almost anything else, and even with hardware, there's ways of doing simulations, etc. But the best way to think about it is, I'm going to try something small. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to get that fast feedback and figure out what to do. And we can do that in just about any work that's being done. That's not pure manufacturing, because that's a little harder because you're just repeating a whole bunch of processes. But anything that you're using knowledge work for, building requirements. I always wish that the requirements portion of the work was actually done in a more agile, let's get feedback whether or not our requirements actually made sense first process, the whole thing. And we run lots of projects in not formal Agile, but Agile. They're very agile in the sense of, I'm going to have it well documented in the sense of what is it I want to do, and get that feedback very quickly, and then pivot, and then figure out what the right thing is. What should I really be doing? And focus that way.
Yeah, I think feedback and pivot are kind of the big points that come up with Agile.
Thank you, guys. So I guess, how can students use these Agile techniques for school projects? This can be for college or high school, in terms of, what we're asking about.
I recently did a presentation on personal Kanban, and I covered several college student examples where they were doing everything from a like a single project to all the way through to their ongoing flow of work. A lot of college students are able to make their work visible, which is a very important thing. Rosalind mentioned manufacturing. The thing about manufacturing is you can see the inventory, right? It's physical. But in knowledge work, which includes things like education, legal, sales and marketing, writing books, whatever, IT, all of these, it's not visible. So this is why we put things on sticky notes or whatever, because it suddenly you can see how much work there is, and you can manipulate it and manage your work physically or digitally at least. And that's something that I would certainly recommend to college students. There are lots of little software packages out there for doing this sort of thing, for managing your work that way. And that's a great place to start. The other thing, coming from Lean, is limit how much work you have in progress. If you start tons and tons of things, it is scientifically proven that it may feel like you're getting more done, and multitasking may feel like a wonderful skill, but actually in the end, you're going to get less done doing that. It's better to focus and finish, and just try it, and you'll see how that works. It takes a little bit of discipline, but it's a great way to apply it to your own projects. And it reminds me, I need to bother my daughter who's in college about this and remind her.
So personal Kanban or personal Trello boards or personal whatever you want to do. I know people who work well that way. And that is one thing that as a college student or a student, having the to-do list, having the assignments, having those things, tracking it that way is one good thing. The other thing that I always say is, at least I hope, everyone in college and in high school is having team projects. Please don't say everything's independent. Please learn to play with others. What the skill you learn most important in school is learning how to work with others, learning how to collaborate, learning how to do projects with other people that have different skills. And any of those school projects, why not? Why not use Kanban? Why not use a process? Show the work, make it visible, make it clear who's doing what, so you don't run into those problems that you have in college projects. I thought you were doing that. I thought, yeah. Make it clear. I know with my son, he was in first robotics, and when he was in high school, and now he's off in college, but when he was in first, we set up planning, work items and planning and source code management, and they did all their work in a way that we could see it. We knew what was going on. You could track it, because that made it easier. You really knew who was doing what. You knew what had to get done when. And with robotics, it's a project. You've got events you've got to be ready for. You've got things to do. And some of it is software, some of it's hardware, some of it's presentation, some of it's documentation. All of that was managed as part of the project. So, all of those kinds of projects or clubs or any of those things can be managed that way.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And it's funny that you see, because I'm a college student, and I do see that, Agile is lack thereof when it's taught in classes, or it's just not taught in the way that, it should be. And so I think it's really important. And that's why I told all the people in my course that I'm taking that it's about Agile. I was like, come listen to this podcast. You guys need to learn about this. These are the experts. And so come learn. So thank you guys very much for the feedback. I know that the college students and even the high school students that are listening really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. So I can't believe the hour is almost up. Wow, you guys, this was a really good conversation. Then we need to start winding down. So I want to thank you both so much for joining us today. It was a really, really good show.
Well, thanks so much. It was fun.
Thank you. It's been great.
One last thing before you two go. Rosalind, can you let our audience know how people can reach you? Because I bet you they'll have many questions to ask.
So I'm accessible at Rosalind Rad on Twitter, or Rosalind Radcliffe in LinkedIn. I use Facebook for personal stuff. So those are the easiest ways. My email is also accessible to the world, rradclif@us.ibm.com. And I answer anybody. And the other thing I do is I enjoy helping students, talking to students, mentoring others. So if people want to learn about careers in IT, and I'm happy to talk. So my calendar is full. So to some extent, I'm happy to talk at strange times usually.
And Janice, you as well.
Yeah. So I'm very reachable on LinkedIn for Janice Linden Reed. And also I can be emailed at Janice, JANICE, @readyoption.com.
Perfect.
And they can go to you have a website, readyoption.com?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the link I provided to you, though, was actually a different link, but yes.
We have it. We'll
do that too.
So we'll have show notes and we'll have all the links and the way to reach you guys. And thank you so much for providing that, because I know that our audience will have questions. And I may get in touch with you both as well, because part of what we do here is to help college students. So now that you've volunteered, I may be bothering you. So just a reminder to our listeners that although this show is live, we do record them and release them as a podcast. So please subscribe to the Lurnist Show on Apple iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or your platform of choice. You can find the links to the show on our website, thelurnist.com. That is the LURNIST.com.
And of course, thank you to our sponsor, Learn Agile. Visit learnagile.com to learn about what we can do for your career in Agile.
And so that's it for now. Thanks for listening. We will be back in about a month at 11 a.m. Arizona time, which I believe will be Mountain Standard Time at that time. And thanks again to our special guests today. We really, really enjoyed having you both on the show.
Yes, thank you.